Hey everybody, welcome back to the Behaviour Revolution Scriptures. We've been going through Leviticus here, and in our last episode we talked about the clean and unclean instructions about eating. And I don't want you to think as we go through this that we've got to be really afraid of messing up or afraid of becoming unclean. Let me make something clear. Ever since Yahushua died, his blood covers us. His blood has washed us clean and made us acceptable to the Father. We are now in that cloud. Remember the three clouds of set apartness and common and clean and common and unclean? We are now in the set apart. We have been presented as set apart to Yahushua. So none of these instructions here can make us unclean. Does that mean we should eat unclean animals? No, it doesn't. But if we did, like if we did it by accident, or if, I'm sure we eat things that are wrong all the time based on all the hundreds of ingredients that are secret ingredients that are in foods these days. Does that mean we have to be afraid of being ritually unclean? No, there is nothing that we can do to make ourselves ritually unclean anymore, aside from completely walking away and denying Yahushua and his blood. We've been set apart and we are washed clean and we are clean. However, so what's the point of Leviticus then? Why are we going through this then if none of it's relevant and we're clean? Because by reading this and going through this, we understand our bridegroom. We understand what pleases him. There are certain things and certain behaviors that he considers an abomination. Like we were talking about the clean and unclean animals. If we eat unclean animals, if we eat pigs, if we eat lobsters, if we eat things like that, it's an abomination. He calls it an abomination. Do you think he changed his mind? And suddenly said, well, my blood's washed you clean of all that now, so go ahead, eat whatever you want. No. Yes, his blood has washed us clean from everything and anything. Intentional, unintentional crimes. Any wickedness we've committed in our life has been washed away. But if we know what pleases him, just like if we know what pleases someone in the natural, in our marriage, if we know what pleases someone, are you going to give them a dog's turd on their plate? No, I don't appreciate that on my plate. I won't divorce you. I won't cut you off for it. But please don't serve me dog poo on my breakfast plate. Now, do you know what I'm saying? We do what we can do to please our partner, our husbands and wives and everybody in our lives, not because we're afraid of being cut off, afraid of becoming ritually unclean. We're not going through this to because we're petrified. Oh, does that mean we have to grow big beards and we have to, not allowed to do this, not allowed to do that? The whole purpose, as I've said, is to learn about Yahushua and what pleases him. Not to see how far back we can slip before we're cut off, but to see how far forward we can go. Because Yahushua wants to marry those who are running their race to be with him. Not who can just sit back and, see how disobedient I can be before he actually cuts me off. I want to know where the line in the sand is so that I know if I do that, I can be as selfish as I want before he cuts me off. You know what I'm saying? There is no line. Go forward. There's two resurrections. Those who want to sit back and be lazy might make it to the second resurrection, but we're talking about the first resurrection. I'm addressing those in the bride here, and I assume you want to be part of the bride. So the reason it looks like, I don't want you to think I'm just pulling bits and pieces out of Leviticus and we have to do this bit, but we don't have to do that bit. This bit's cultural, but this bit's this. I'm just like a smorgasbord. It's not like that. None of the things written in this book are going to make us unclean today. However, if we are doing behaviors that he considers abominable, we better watch out. That's what I wanted to say. So we're going to come into clean and unclean. And as you can see here, there's a heading, is unclean and impure the same thing? Is unclean and impure the same thing? Purity is the result of staying away from the unclean. You stay away from things that are unclean, you're pure. Impurity is the result of coming into contact with the unclean. So another important word connected to this is defiled or defilement. To become defiled means to lose one's set-apart status. We're still talking about, back here, so if you touch something unclean, you become defiled. It's the process of it. If you don't, you stay ritual, so you stay pure. So let's go back down here. Purity is the result of staying away from the unclean. Impurity is the result of coming into contact with the unclean. Another important word connected to this is defiled or defilement. To become defiled means to lose one's set-apart status. Defiled. It indicates a loss of ritual purity. Rituals. We're not talking about rituals anymore. We don't exist in the age era of rituals anymore. Since Yahushua's blood has washed us clean, there's no such thing as ritual impurity anymore. I'm going to go into this a bit more. If you touch something unclean, you are now impure and cannot be in the presence of set-apartness. There's nothing we can touch anymore, no behaviours, no evil that we can touch that is more powerful than Yahushua's blood. So there is a lot of relief and freedom in that. However, it's all about relationship with the bridegroom. What are you going to do with that relief, and what are you going to do with that freedom? Are you just going to go, woohoo, party on, I can do whatever I want, and just apologise afterwards and repent? And no, because I believe after a while, if you show your true colours and you're just really doing it in Yahushua's face, I believe he can cut you off. What does he say about the branches that don't bear fruit? He cuts them off, And I've seen many people in my life that have been cut off from the branch. Some by choice and some not. You cannot touch something unclean, you are now good, and cannot be in the presence of set-apartness. Understanding these subtle differences will help us moving forward. It's the whole idea of, it's the process of becoming unclean. I mean, if you touched a dead animal, you don't become a dead animal, do you? But you become unclean, It's that whole idea. If you were sent outside the camp because you did an unintentional crime, you didn't become that crime. That's why the whole idea of calling it a sin offering was wrong. Because you don't become the sin, you become unclean, and you need purifying. That's why I called it a purifying offering. It's the process that happens. Anyway, let's go into some behaviours now that made people impure and unclean. Then Yahushua said to Moshe, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If a woman becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son, she will be unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during her menstrual period. And if she gives birth to a daughter, she will be unclean for 14 days. And on the 8th day, the boy's foreskin must be circumcised, and after waiting 33 days, or 66 for a girl, she will be purified from the bleeding of childbirth. During this time of purification, she must not touch anything that is set apart. She must not enter the sanctuary until her time of purification is over. When the time of purification is completed for either a son or a daughter, the woman must bring a 1-year-old lamb for an ascending year offering and a young pigeon or turtle dove for a purifying offering. She must bring her offerings to the priest at the entrance of the tabernacle, who will present them to me to purify her. Then she will be clean again after her bleeding at childbirth. If a woman cannot afford to bring a lamb, she must bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons. One will be for the ascending near and the other for the purifying offering. The priest will sacrifice them to purify her, and she will be clean." See, why would she have to do, if it's called a sin offering, why would she hasn't committed it, she hasn't done anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with a woman's menstrual cycle. That's how she's created, and that's how she brings forth life, just as a woman that's just had a baby. There's nothing, what's she done wrong? What's the disobedience? What's the evil behaviour? There's no sin. There's no sin in this. We're not talking about disobedience or evil here. We're talking about things that make a person unclean and have to be set apart from the camp, So as it says here in the turquoise, it doesn't have anything to do with the baby. It's the discharge of blood that has made the mother impure. Got that? It's made her impure. That is why she needs to be cleansed. Today it is impossible for Yahushua's bride to become unclean due to the power of his ultimate blood sacrifice. So from his perspective, he cleansed us, delivered us, brought us back, and we are now free and clean to serve him obediently, to serve him obediently. That's why he has cleansed us, delivered us, and brought us back, so that we can run our race and be obedient to get to know closer and closer and closer, so that we can marry him. That's the whole purpose of this. So while we don't have to read this and be, oh no, we don't have to, women don't have to worry these days. From the menstrual cycle or from giving birth, you don't have to be worried about becoming impure anymore. It's not about that these days, because ever since Yahushua's sacrifice, these principles don't matter as such to us. So can you see, going back up to the top, there's a difference between unclean and impure. Like when you did something wrong, you became unclean, whereas the process of being impure is through, like a woman's menstrual cycle or through giving birth to a child. We're going to see this pattern. That's what I wanted to say. There's a pattern here, because we instantly read about the women's childbirth and we start, our scientific Greek mind thinking starts clicking in going, oh, well, that's because the baby represents this and that's why. We're always looking for the why. Why would Yahushua declare that a woman's unclean? Is it because it's germy? Is it because she's gonna see the why? The why is not important. It's the pattern. Hebrew thinking involves looking at patterns, all right? So we're looking at the pattern here of blood making a person unclean. A discharge of blood. We're going to be looking at more bodily fluids and discharges as we go on, and there's a pattern in that. Men and women. Sores oozing, genital oozing, all sorts of discharges that the body has. Spitting on someone made a person impure. So it's not just a woman, we're just starting here for now. But like I've said a few times now, this doesn't make us unclean today in Yahushua's eyes, because nothing can make us unclean in Yahushua's eyes. He can approach us. He doesn't have to be afraid of destroying us by approaching us, because we've been washed in his blood and we've accepted his blood. And now it's just a matter of which resurrection are we going to be in. That's what all this is coming down to, making behavior front and center, because that's our worship today. That's the only thing that's relevant today in the 21st century. So while we're going through this, women, you don't have to worry about your menstrual cycle. You don't have to quarantine yourselves or anything like that. Let's go on to water. It is immersion in water that transforms a person or thing that is unclean into a state of clean. If you look at all these scriptures we've been through so far, it is immersion in water that transforms a person or thing that is unclean into a state of clean. So water is the purifying agent and blood is the atoning agent. What does that mean? Water is the purifying agent and blood is the atoning agent. Let's go back up here for a minute. If you became unclean, you had to be ritually washed in water in order to become clean again. But if you wanted to become set apart, you needed to go and have blood shed for you, blood atonement, the substitution of the animal, the blood. Does that make sense? There had to be water and there had to be blood. Which one came first? That's interesting. Which one? We always thought it was repent, be immersed, and repent, the blood, water immersion. Is it? We're looking at patterns here, remember? That's how the Hebrews looked at things, in the way of patterns. Water is the purifying agent and blood is the atoning agent. And purification must occur before atonement. The same thing occurs with the sacrifice of Yahushua. First, we are cleansed by Yahushua as the source of living water. Then we are made set apart and acceptable by his blood. First, we are cleansed by Yahushua, the living water. Then we are made set apart and acceptable by his blood. During Yahushua's death, we are told that one of the Roman soldiers thrust a spear into his side and water poured out along with blood. Water purifies and then the blood atones. That's interesting, because I always thought, okay, we've got to believe in the blood of Yahushua and then be immersed in water. What if it all happens at the same time? What if we have to be ritually washed which is the whole idea of, that's why 𝗂𝗥𝗏 was the immerser, was immersing people before 𝗂𝗓𝗔 came along, and then 𝗂𝗓𝗔 came along and he told them, go and immerse people in water. What's water got to do with any of this? We're dealing with the ritual purifying agent here. Water purifies us. It's symbolic. We don't just, physically we just go down dry and come up wet, but we're doing it in obedience. So what does it say about all those believers who won't be immersed? Are we delivered upon our immersion? Or does it happen at the same time? I think it happens at the same time myself, because water and the blood work hand in hand. And as we know, when the Ruach fell on the believers in the early assembly, the Ruach was on the Gentiles, remember? The Ruach was, we talked about that last episode, the Ruach went and filled them, 𝗂𝗓𝗔 filled them with his spirit before they were immersed. That was because of the prejudice of the early assembly. They wouldn't have immersed them otherwise. Repent and be immersed in the name of 𝗂𝗓𝗔. They wouldn't have done that because they were outsiders, they were Gentiles. But by 𝗂𝗓𝗔 putting his Ruach in them straight away and them all babbling in languages, he showed Peter that, careful, that my Ruach, my spirit is going forth to the whole world, anyone who will cry out and receive me. So, but it does show, I thought the pattern was interesting, because we've always thought, okay, blood, then water, then oil. Blood of 𝗂𝗓𝗔, then we get immersed, and then we receive the Ruach. But, 𝗂𝗓𝗔 can do all three in the one at the same time, or, in this case, look, water always came first. Water you couldn't be atoned by blood unless you're purified in water. So, today, in the age of 𝗂𝗓𝗔 having shed his blood already, I believe it happens at the same time, because people might say they believe in 𝗂𝗓𝗔. Oh, I believe in the blood of 𝗂𝗓𝗔, but until you actually are serious enough to put yourself off and go to the water, until you're that serious, that really shows that that's how you enter Yisrael, I believe. Once you come out of the water, you're a new creature. How can you start overcoming anything? How can the blood of 𝗂𝗓𝗔 be effective if the Ruach is inside you and your old man, your old inclination is dead at the bottom of the water? So I believe it's true. I believe water, then the blood, and then the Ruach. Interesting to look at the patterns, isn't it? Not the whys, but the patterns. Let's look at serious skin infections. I'm going to breeze through this pretty quick because it's pretty intense. 𝗂𝗓𝗔 said to Moshe, if anyone has a swelling, a rash, boil, sore, burn, or discolored skin that might develop into a serious skin infection, not leprosy. I never knew that. We always thought it was leprosy. And they had to go outside the camp, and they were a special camp for the lepers and all this. We've been taught that for years in movies. Ben-Hur out in the land of the lepers. No, leprosy or Hansen's disease didn't kind of show up until about 500 AD. So we're not talking about leprosy. We're just talking about rashes, swellings, boils, sores, burns, discolored skin infections. Must be brought to Aaron the priest or one of his sons, who will examine their skin and decide whether it's serious or not. If the problem appears to be under the skin and infected, the person is pronounced unclean. If the skin is only mildly discolored, the priest will quarantine the person for 7 days, after which time he will examine again, and if the skin has worsened, the person is quarantined for another 7 days. What I want you to look at here also is, I know I've declared that nothing we do now can make us unclean, but it's interesting to look at the way 𝗂𝗓𝗔 quarantines things. It's interesting to look today at where a lot of the diseases are coming from and what animals they're coming from too. Even though it's not the animal's fault, and the same diseases could come from sheep or goats or cows, it's not about that. 𝗂𝗓𝗔 declares things unclean, so they're unclean. Not because the creature itself is evil, but by doing certain behaviors that 𝗂𝗓𝗔 hates, you're opening yourself up to curses. And what I find interesting is a lot of the curses are self-inflicted. Don't eat those animals because they're unclean. Instead of us trying to work out the why, just don't do it and you'll be protected. But because we're in the 21st century and an age of science and information, we can now look at it and go, well, look at the diseases that are in there and look at the diseases that you get from that. And just like here, it's interesting to look and see, while none of this makes us unclean today, how infections spread and why Yahushua separates certain people from other people, so that death doesn't ensue, so that infections don't spread, uncleanliness doesn't spread. Because clean and unclean, what we're learning about here, is not a hygienic issue. We're talking about people who could come into the set-apart presence of Yahushua or not. It's a spiritual thing. But remember, there's clean and unclean in both dimensions. There's unclean spirits that have been cast out of the camp in the other dimension as well. They've been kicked out. So uncleanliness kicks us out of the camp. Do you understand that? I hope I'm making any kind of sense here. So, the priest will have a look, and if it was just a rash and the problem hasn't spread, their clothes must be washed and they'll be pronounced as clean again. But if the rash continues to spread after the person has been examined by the priest and has been pronounced clean, the infected person must return to be examined again, and if the priest finds that the rash has spread, he must pronounce that person unclean, for it is indeed a skin infection. Anyone who develops a serious skin infection must go to the priest for an examination, and if the priest finds white swelling or the hair on the spot has turned white and there is an open sore in the infected area, it is a chronic skin infection. Chronic or old means it's been there for a while, and the priest must pronounce the person unclean. In such cases, the person need not be quarantined, for it is obvious that the skin has been taken over by the infection. What if the infection has spread all over the person's skin, covering the body from head to toe? The priest will pronounce the person clean because the skin has turned completely white. However, if the open sores appear, any open sores appear, the priest must declare the infected person as unclean as soon as he sees it, since open sores indicate the presence of a skin infection. However, if the open sores heal and turn white like the rest of the skin, the person must return to the priest for another examination. If the affected areas have indeed turned white, the priest will pronounce the person clean. Interesting point here, the priests were not doctors treating the infection. Don't think that they were, bandaging and wrapping and, they were just merely separating what is clean and unclean. Ceremonially clean and unclean. So they weren't doctors. They weren't even helping. They weren't even giving advice, really. They were just separating. That was their job as priests. Remember, we talked about that in our last episode. We are to discern, decide, separate what is clean and what is unclean, what is pure and what is impure, what is good and what is evil, and behave accordingly. If a man loses his hair and his head becomes bald, he is still clean. Can't help that, can he? He's still clean. He's just going bald. But if a reddish white sore appears on the bald area, this is a skin infection, and if there's swelling or white sores on it, the priest will pronounce him unclean. Those who suffer from a serious skin infection must tear their clothing and leave their hair uncombed, covering their mouth and calling out, unclean, unclean. As long as the serious disease lasts, they will be unclean. They must live in isolation in their place outside the camp. Unclean live outside the camp. Unclean live outside the camp. So let me talk to you a minute about why we feel so bad. Why do you feel bad about your life? Why do you feel bad about this? Why do I must be unclean? I must be outside the camp. I must, I've been immersed. I'm walking, I'm trying my hardest, but I keep failing. I don't feel happy. I'm a miserable cuss. This, that. I must be unclean. I must be outside the camp. Is that what's happening here? No, because we have direct access to the throne room of Yahushua, which means we must be clean in order to be able to do that. In order to go into his dimension, we must be clean, otherwise we'd be frackled up. So we are clean. So why is it I feel the way I feel? Because if you've given your life to Yahushua and you are behaving in ways that does not please him, what does Hebrews 12 say? I will flog, chastise, discipline, rebuke. Does he just do it verbally in your ear? No, he makes you feel it. You do something wrong, think something wrong, say something wrong. We feel it. This is not am I outside the camp? Have I been cut off am I impure, unclean? No, this is you're clean and you're coming close to Yahushua. Remember the priests, those who are operating close to the fire, close to Yahushua's presence, are going to be judged more harshly. They are held to a higher standard because they're the bride. And you can't be my bride unless you're perfect. So keep going. Come on, you're in the battle. So that's why you're feeling the way you feel. Not because he's given up on you. He promises never to leave you or forsake you. You're feeling bad because of your behavior. You're feeling bad because of you, not him. He makes us feel alive and amazing. Our behavior cuts us off from, he cannot be cut off from us once we've been immersed. We're clean, we're not the outside nations anymore. The nations he has nothing to do with, he can't stand them. They're under his wrath, judgment, death outside of his covenant. Once we're in his covenant, we have access to him and we have life. So he's connected to us. He will not disconnect himself from us. But we disconnect from him when we do behaviors that he hates. And that's why we're going through Leviticus, to learn what behaviors he hates. Not what behaviors can cut us off, because nothing can cut us off anymore. The blood, the bodily emissions, anything like that we're going to go through, sores, boils. Oh, I'm going bald, I must be outside that. No. Oh, I'm sick, I've got an infection. Oh, well, talk to Yahushua about it. Go to the doctor, go to the hippie medic or whoever you talk to these days for your herbs and whatever you want to do it to make yourself better. But this is not a being cut off from Yahushua issue here. This is a, how do we please Yahushua? So if you're feeling dreadful, behavior is the only thing that can make you feel dreadful. Your bad habits and bad behaviors, just like mine. So that's what we need to read and understand when we go through this. Our behavior pulls us out of the camp by choice. We're allowed access. It's silly, isn't it? It's like them being told you can have full access into the tabernacle now, which is what happened in David's time. The veil wasn't there, the ark was visible for everybody to see, the presence was available to everybody. Now imagine somebody just ran away and hid outside the camp. That's what it's like for us who have direct access to the throne room when we run away from Yahushua and do what we want to do and do dirty, unclean habits and behaviors. And be disobedient. That's what it's like for us. Even though we haven't been told to go outside, you're allowed in here. Full access to my presence and my love. You're my bride. And you're running away, hiding behind outside the fence. So, it's silliness. So let's talk about mold or mildew in fabrics. I never knew you could be unclean because your house could be unclean too. This is mainly when they got to the land of Canaan, because they had brick structures. But ready? Go.
What if mildew or mold contaminates some woolen or linen clothing, fabric, animal hide, or anything made of leather? If it turns greenish or reddish, it's definitely mold or mildew and must be shown to the priest, who, after examining it, will put the article in quarantine for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest must inspect it again, and if the mold or mildew is spread, the item is clearly contaminated, is unclean, and the priest must completely destroy it with fire. But if the contaminated area has not spread, the priest will order the object to be washed and then quarantined for 7 more days. Then, if he finds that the quarantined area has not changed colour after being washed, even if it did not spread, the object is ruined and must be completely burnt up. But if he finds the contaminated area has faded after being washed, he must cut the spot from the clothing, the fabric, or the leather. If the spot later reappears on the clothing, the fabric, or the leather article, the mildew is clearly spreading and the contaminated object must be burnt up. If the spot disappears from the clothing, the fabric, or the leather article after it has been washed, it must be washed again and it will be clean.
One of the main functions of Yahushua's bride today is to separate clean and unclean behavior. And how can we know what that is without reading Yahushua's instructions? So does that reaffirm what I've been saying here? We are to separate what is clean and unclean behavior. Separate ourselves from what is clean and unclean. Don't separate yourself from the world, as in your job, your wife, husband, children. I'm a believer now. I don't like any of your behaviors. I don't like your pagan festivals. I'm separating myself from all of it. Is that how you operate? You can separate from the behavior without separating physically from the people. Does that make sense? You can do that. Because if you understand that a behavior makes you unclean, don't do it. And stay and love your family. Stay in your job. Stay doing what you're doing. Separate yourself from the unclean behaviors that come out of you from within your heart. Let's talk about quarantine for a minute. Warning, quarantine area. There was an actual special tent or shelter located near the outskirts of the camp, but still inside, that was prepared for those folks who were suspected of having a skin disease, but had not yet been officially diagnosed as unclean. So this special tent was near the outskirts of the camp, but it wasn't outside because it was only for those who were suspected of having a skin disease, but had not yet been officially diagnosed as unclean. They had to wait for 7 days before being re-examined. During this period, the afflicted person is in a state of limbo, not knowing. So psychologically, it must have been a very torturous 7 days. Even though the priest had not yet officially pronounced them clean or unclean, in terms of status, they were still considered unclean. They were still in the quarantine tent near the outskirts of the camp. So they still weren't allowed near their family because they were suspected of being unclean. So they're in limbo. Imagine waiting for that 7 days, not knowing if you were going to be outside the camp forever, away from your whole family. A person even just suspected of a skin infection was not allowed to live with his family or mingle with the general population. And of course, during this period, they were barred from participating in any worship rituals, as there was an assumption surrounding the infection that it was an outward mark or sign of some hidden or inward unclean condition, behaviour known only to 𝗂𝗍. So that's interesting. They used to connect the spiritual with the physical back here. They used to assume, even though it wasn't judged by the priest yet, there was just this general assumption, cultural assumption, that if you were starting to break out with some kind of infection, you must have done something wrong. That was their assumption. However, look what 𝗂𝗍 says about that assumption. Judge not. So even though this was the assumption that if you've done something wrong, or you're disobedient, or you're filthy, wicked habit of some sort, it's starting to break out, it's a physical affliction. Even so, 𝗂𝗍 made it clear that we must not judge or assume that one's illness or misfortune was a result of disobedient behaviour. That's what 𝗂𝗍 said. He even went so far as to say that in some cases, one's unfortunate physical condition was the plan of Elohim for the good. This is exactly what 𝗂𝗍 said when asked about the blind man he had healed. His disciples asked him if he was blind because he was disobedient, or if his parents were disobedient. And 𝗂𝗍 said neither. His condition was so the esteem of Elohim could be revealed at the appointed time. Let's also not forget that we are living in a fallen world. When disobedience came into the world, it brought along with it death and disease. So in that sense, yes, there is a connection between death and disease, but that applies to everybody in a general sense. However, it is not wise to assume there is a direct connection between one's affliction and a specific behaviour of disobedience he or she may or may not have committed. Now put that in your pipe, yeah? It's not for us to judge. And I believe it's a personal thing. I believe you know if some affliction comes on you and you've been doing something wrong, I believe you can join the dots yourself. I don't believe it's for someone else to come in and say, oh, what have you done wrong? It's nobody's bloody business, really. It's between you and 𝗂𝗍. But the point is, you know if it's just a cough or a cold or something that happens to everybody around it, or if you know that there's something really going on and 𝗂𝗍's letting you know through everything around you, and then yourself, your own, physical body or whatever, letting you know that you need to change, or it's between you and 𝗂𝗍. That's not for someone to come and say. A person pronounced unclean due to a skin infection is outcast from their family, people, and worst of all, they were separated from 𝗂𝗍. And unless they are healed from their infection, that separation could be permanent. Through the poor, wretched condition of unclean skin infections, 𝗂𝗍 is showing us that this is how he views the whole world: unclean and outcasts, diseased and on the verge of death. That's how the whole world is. Remember, ever since Abram came along, the world is now only separated into two groups, clean and unclean. Yeah? Yisrael and the world, the nations. So Yahushua is showing us through all these skin infections how he views the whole world, unclean, outcasts. And just as Yahushua showed Moshe, telling him to put his hand in and out of his garment. Remember when he was at the burning bush? Put your hand into your garment. It came out with a skin infection. Put your hand back in and it was healed. So just as he showed Moshe through the skin infection on his hand, it is only him who can heal this condition. He is the one who calls, he is the one who chooses, heals, and delivers a person unto himself. He is the one who does everything. So it's not up to us. Oh, we're the believers, so we can come into your life and start declaring things about you and saying that you're sick for this reason and you need to do this and you need to do that. Oh, please, get a life. Bugger off, get a life. Work on your own relationship. Take the log out of your own eye and work on your own relationship with Yahushua. Because if you want to make the bride, it's going to take all your concentration and energy for the rest of your life to overcome everything Yahushua wants you to overcome. You've got no time to worry about what other people have to overcome. You worry about yourself. Yeah? So, we're going to end on this. An evil tongue. Evil tongue. Remember back here when I said that the people that were unclean were quarantined and they weren't allowed to, it was just an assumption surrounding the infection of a person that it was an outward mark or sign of some hidden inward unclean behavior. The spiritual is showing up in the physical now. You've done something wrong. It was an assumption. Yahushua said not to judge, but this was just the assumption in the Hebrew culture that you had done something wrong. What was it they had done? This is the number one behavior that caused infections, according to the Hebrews. An evil tongue. And all of us suffer from this. All of this is the number one behavior we all have to work on. The filth and opinions and lies and who knows what else that comes out of our mouth. Who we are. The condition of our heart comes out of our mouth more than it does any other part of our body. The mouth shows our true behavior more than anything else. An evil tongue, the number one behavior that causes infections. The Hebrews have always considered illness and infections to be a spiritual problem. Physical judgment by Yahushua. It was believed to be a visible sign of one's inner uncleanliness. This naturally begs the question, which behavior causes it? The answer is an evil tongue or malicious gossip. Lashon hara. Talking evil about someone or saying wicked things to harm a person's reputation was considered worse than murder. Worse than murder. Do you know that? Talking evil about someone or saying wicked things to harm a person's reputation, whether behind them or in front of them, was considered worse than murder. Why? Why? Yahushua used words to create the universe. Remember we talked about that amazing thing about Yahushua's words, how there's life in his words. His life, his word has the power to create things just from his words. Yahushua used words to create the universe, literally speaking everything into existence. The words that come out of our mouths are very powerful and must be chosen with care. While our words don't have the power to create physical matter, like Yahushua's do, our words do have power. We are created in his image. And on this realm, because we don't live in the other realm, the higher dimension, in this dimension, our words, more than anything else in our behavior, our words have the power to create things, not physical matter, but physical reactions, physical war and peace. You know, our words can build up or tear down. The destruction of the world could be, nuclear bombs and nuclear holocausts is in the power of the tongue. Why hasn't it happened? Because I believe Yahushua's holding it all at bay. He's orchestrating everything. But you understand that? That was an interesting, not a twist, but interesting. I didn't know it like this. The power of our words. Just like Yahushua's words have power, our words have power too. So be very careful about the words you choose to speak out of that hole in your faith. We all lose our balance and stumble in many things, especially our words, except someone who's perfect, of course, who can control their whole body by controlling their mouth. Look, we put bits in the horse's mouth so that it obeys us, and we can turn their body with it. Also, look at the huge ships driven by strong winds. Aren't they steered by a very small rudder? So too, our tongue is a very little part, but how non-stop and greatly does it boast. How non-stop and greatly does it boast. See how a tiny fire kindles and burns the entire forest? Well, the tongue is a fire also, the world of disobedience. Among our body parts, the tongue is the one that defiles the whole body. So just that little member can defile the whole body. Among our body parts, the tongue is the one that defiles the whole body and can engulf our whole lives and future with fire. For every kind of beast and bird, reptile and sea creature has been tamed by mankind, but no one can tame the tongue, for it is unruly, evil, and filled with deadly poison. With it, we bless Yahushua one minute and then abuse someone the next, who's made in his likeness. Out of the same mouth proceed blessings and cursings. It shouldn't be like this, people. So we're going to finish on this, guys, the power of the tongue. Put this into your everyday life and your everyday behaviour. How much of your day is spent using the word I? How much of your day is stalking conversations, even other people's conversations, so that you can jump in and talk about that amazing thing that is you and your take on it? Oh, I've done that, yes, and I think this about it. Did anybody ask your opinion? Did somebody come and say, excuse me, such and such, what do you think about this? Did anybody really ask you much opinion in your day? Or are you in there just sprouting your opinions anyway? Oh, I've done that, yes, I've travelled to there, I've done this, I've bought that, I've been that, I've lived that, I've this, aren't you sick of that I? Everybody else is. The flesh, the I has to die. The I has to die. Our tongue, our mouth. I thought that was fascinating about the words we speak. Can create things, can create moods. What happens when you open your mouth can create a whole mood for somebody. A mood in a room. A room that people either run for their lives from when you walk in or run towards you when you walk in. Your mouth reveals the state of your heart. Our tongues defile us. So it's not a matter of controlling only our tongue, it's a matter of controlling our thoughts, because what our thoughts in our hearts come out of our mouth. What we let into our hearts, what we think in our heart comes out of our mouth. So don't be fake and just control your mouth and just think all this hideous stuff. It's about controlling what we think in our heart so that it doesn't come out. Because you don't have, if you don't have the self-control to control your thoughts and they're in there, you won't have the self-control to control them when they come out. All it needs is a bit of pressure, a bit of stress, a bit of inconvenience, and it'll all come out of your mouth. And then you're revealing what was really in there. Do you really think that about me? Do you know what I mean? It's all unclean spirits anyway, but can you understand the power of our tongue, brothers and sisters? And the Hebrews back in this time believed that if you spoke like that and had this behavior, it would make you sick. What does that say today? I know we're not allowed to judge, but what does it say? You can still look out your eye holes and see. How does the world behave? And what state is the world in? How do the believers behave? And what state are half the believers in? Do they care? Are they checking their thoughts? Are they checking the words they speak? Or do we all have our rights to live on this earth and behave how we want? not according to Leviticus. It's not an issue of being clean or unclean now. It's an issue of pleasing Yahusha and wanting his protection around you to become the bride. Hope that's been clear today, guys. It's very serious. The power of our tongue can make us sick. You know? We can still be allowed into the presence of Yahusha, but our physical bodies might be riddled with disease or from our own bad choices, our own wicked disobedience. So chew on that, guys, and repent, come towards the Father and promise not to behave like that anymore. And he takes you and washes you clean and says, don't worry about it. Go and disobey me no more. Go and do this evil behavior no more. Stop doing it. And you'll feel different. Watch and see. Don't listen to all the, you can't be forgiven, you can't tell anybody about that, you can't. That's what they call you too. Love you guys. See you later.